Maybe we shouldn't use the term ultra-conservative. Maybe we should just call them conservative and refer to the rest of the so-called GOP as moderates, as people who reach across the aisle.
But what about the people who are not moderates and who are not Tea Partiers, just normal Republican lawmakers?
Right, but I'm just trying to say,
exactly.
Labeling matters, and I think that already by sort of, and I understand this is how everybody refers to them, but by calling them ultra-conservative, I mean, that makes it sound like they are automatically, ipso facto, outside of the mainstream, whereas I think you could sort of, I think referring to them as just conservatives and the rest of the GOP as...
Well, I don't think it's fair to take the conservative mantle away from some folks in the middle. I mean, these are people who might not even be considered moderate. These are people who are just Republicans.
I would even take hardline over ultra. But the other thing I would offer is just how many votes do they really need? How many votes will they need to get rid of, let's say, Obamacare? Will they need 6?
No, 51. It was brought in with 51. Budget
reconciliation process.
Right.
But I think you'd have to, the Democrats have shown a willingness in the past to use the filibuster when necessary, and you might need 60 to get the things done that a lot of these guys are talking about.
Right.
You might need the 60. It might not be enough to have 51.
Well, I think a lot of Tea Partiers are going to be a little disappointed that even if they do get all of these people that you've lined up on the chalkboard, the rules of the Senate make it slow, difficult going. And that was intentionally. As George Washington told Thomas Jefferson, Chuck Schumer loves to quote this all the time, that the Senate is supposed to be a cooling saucer, cooling the passions of the House. So the rules of the Senate... The rules of the Senate have it set up that each individual senator has a ton of power. And let's face it, let's look back. Who was one of the most powerful senators in the United States Senate? Olympia Snowe. Because she was that 60th vote.
She's like the Sandra Day O'Connor of the Senate.
Exactly. She's like the Sandra Day O'Connor or Susan Collins. So it turns out that moderates actually hold a lot of the power when all the conservatives want to charge forward because you have to get 60 votes, and that requires compromise.
Well, that's great. We have people with principle, people without principle, and people who decide whether or not they're going to have principle based on popularity. Wonderful.
Well, Nancy Pelosi, when you look at sort of the far end of the Democrat side of the aisle, they'll refer to themselves as liberal Democrats. They feel like the rest of them are just Democrats. And now, is that honest? I mean, I think the labeling does sort of matter. And for these guys to come in automatically painted as sort of being way to one side of things,
this is how they're running, Buck. This is not, I mean, this is how they're running, and frankly, this is how they're winning.
They're calling themselves ultra-conservative?
Well, I mean...
I think they probably just say they're returning to founding principles.
Tea Party
no, I understand.
And they are pitting themselves against other Republicans already in the Senate and the House and their opponents. I mean, they are pitting themselves against their friends on the same side of the aisle.
And I think they're saying that they're not conservative. If they're pitting themselves against them, that's right. So, but I don't think they have to say that they're ultra-conservative. I think they just have to say, we're conservative, and you are a bunch of glad-handing politicians that haven't been able to get things done.
Well, I mean,
and we're coming in
you're
for
putting your entire trust in these newcomers. That's great. You can take up their language as well. I'm going to sort of remain distant.
Oh, I'm trying to give them advice.
All of them,
I just mean
and
that
agnostic in this process.
I would just think that if they're going to try to actually have a real impact, they should pay attention to the verbiage that's used, and they shouldn't run as ultra-conservative. They say, we're conservative. We're drawing a line in the sand as to what the principles are. We're constitutional conservatives. There you go. There are better ways to say this.
Practically speaking, once they get to the Senate, if they make it to the Senate, they're also going to have to persuade Mitch McConnell and the party leaders and the elders and the establishment to put them on the committees where they can be influential. I mean, that's something that
Senator... those people out, too.
Mitch McConnell, he's not up, he's not up for election. However, they're going to need to go to the establishment simply to wield the power in the Senate to be able to advance their agenda. So I think a lot of this anti-establishment talk is very successful and very effective when you're running and you're in the GOP primary and you're getting elected. But once you actually have to enact legislation, a lot of it is really about learning the rules of the game.
I think a lot of these Republicans have proven to be very malleable, though. I mean, they cave to the left, so why wouldn't they cave to the right? I mean, they'll often cave to Barack Obama. They'll often give in to Harry Reid. So what makes you think that they wouldn't be able to convince otherwise and maybe, shift some people who are more centrist over to the right? I think that it's part policy. It's part principled conservatism, and it's part attitude. I think people are craving a gutsy attitude, and a lot of the people we have in there right now, I don't think, even though they wear a nice big stamp that says Republican, I don't know that they themselves have an appetite for things like entitlement reform to tackle these big issues. That's what I think people are craving.
Well, you're right, but I think the sort of forgotten man in this conversation is also constituents. Folks who are holding Scott Brown accountable, for example. Scott Brown talked tough, talked like a an ultra-conservative.
Not so ultra-conservative after all.
Well, no, because he has constituents who want him to sort of come back to the center.
Right. Yeah.
And I think most of the folks that we're looking at, whether it's Jeff Flake or Ted Cruz or Richard Murdoch, have Tea Party constituents. But, I mean, these people are not just beholden to ideology. They're beholden to voters. So I think that'll also determine how a lot of these people act when they get in.